The laughter before the storm. April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above Caen, France. The air was thin, cold, and filled with the deep, throaty growl of a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine. The sound didn't sing like the sleek whine of a Spitfire, nor hiss like the deadly snarl of a Messerschmitt. It rumbled, a low, thunderous growl that carried across the sky like a storm rolling in. Captain Howard Hank Mayers gripped the control stick of his P-47 Thunderbolt, the cockpit trembling as the massive radial engine roared against the icy wind. Below him, the green and brown patchwork of occupied France drifted slowly by, scarred with smoke trails and the faint flash of anti-aircraft fire. His wingman, Lieutenant Jack Tex Walker, flew tight on his right flank, the silver fuselage of his Thunderbolt glinting in the sunlight. Radio chatter crackled through the headset. Eagle 1 bogies at 10 o'clock high. Looks like a flight of 109s, maybe 110s trailing. Hank's jaw clenched. The Messerschmitts fast, agile, elegant killers. German pilots called them hunters of the sky, and they had laughed when they first saw the Thunderbolt. To them it was a joke, a milk jug with wings. The Luftwaffe pilots mocked its bulk, its size, its supposed slowness. They said it couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight, but Hank knew better. Because the P-47 wasn't built to dance, it was built to survive. Copy that, Tex. Let's give the boys a show. The two Thunderbolts banked left, diving toward the enemy formation. The German pilots spotted them instantly, 4 Messerschmitt Bf 109s peeling out of formation like hawks stooping on prey. For a brief second, Hank saw the flash of their yellow noses and black crosses against the blue sky. Then tracer fire lit the air. The Germans came in confident, laughing maybe, in their cockpits. They'd heard the stories too, the fat American plane that couldn't fight. But then Hank pushed the stick forward, and the jug dropped like a hammer. The air screamed against the fuselage. The altimeter spun wildly. The P-47's wings shuddered but held. No German plane could follow this dive. Not a one. The Thunderbolt could plummet at over 500 miles per hour, faster than the Luftwaffe dared. Hank leveled out low, the ground rushing beneath him. He yanked up, looped behind the Messerschmitts as they tried to recover from their dive ease. And then, with a deep breath, he pressed both triggers. 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns erupted, a thunderous roar that shook the cockpit. Each gun spat lead at 800 rounds per minute. Tracers streaked like molten comets through the air, tearing into the trailing 109. The German fighter's engine burst into flame. Then the whole plane exploded into a fireball, scattering across the French countryside below. "Holy hell, Hank, you got him," Tex shouted over the radio. Hank didn't answer. He was already banking right, pulling the heavy bird into another climb. The remaining German fighters, realizing what they were up against, began to scatter. No more laughter now. No jokes. No smug radio chatter in German. Only silence and fear. The Thunderbolt had arrived. And in the skies above France, the era of the milk jug joke had just ended, replaced by the sound of thunder. The jug that wouldn't die. Later that same afternoon, RAF Base Boxted, England. The ground trembled as Captain Hank Mayers' Thunderbolt touched down, its massive tires screeching against the wet runway. The engine coughed, hissed, then finally wound down into silence. Mechanics sprinted toward the plane, their boots splashing through puddles of rainwater and oil. The P-47 looked like it had flown through hell and back. Bullet holes riddled the wings, one landing gear strut bent slightly from a hard descent. The left wingtip was scorched black, a near miss from a .20 shell. Yet somehow, impossibly, the Thunderbolt had brought its pilot home again. "Good God, Hank," a mechanic muttered, running his hand over the dented fuselage. "How'd this beast stay in the air?" "She's tougher than she looks," Hank said, patting the nose of the aircraft. "You'd have to kill her to bring her down." Inside the operations tent, maps were spread across a table: France, Belgium, the Low Countries. Major William "Buck" Caldwell, the squadron commander, leaned over them, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. "Intel confirms," Buck said. "Your flight nailed a German convoy near Caen after the air fight. You boys didn't just survive, you hurt them." Hank nodded, still shaking from adrenaline. The mission had been more than survival. It was a revelation. The Germans' laughter, their arrogance, all of it had been based on ignorance. The P-47 wasn't meant to outturn or outsprint the Luftwaffe. It was built for something far more brutal, to destroy anything unlucky enough to cross its path. Buck took a long drag, then exhaled slowly. "You know, Hank," he said, "the Krauts called that bird a flying milk jug." "Yeah," Hank replied with a grin, "and today that milk jug just spilled some blood." Outside, mechanics were already reloading belts of .50 caliber ammunition into the Thunderbolts. Each plane carried 8 guns, mounted in the wings, 4 on each side. Together, they could pour over 100 rounds per second into a target. Trucks, trains, tanks, it didn't matter. When the P-47 came down low and opened fire, everything underneath vanished in smoke and fire. The next morning, Hank watched as the flight line came alive. Dozens of Thunderbolts thundered down the runway, engines roaring in perfect unison. The overcast sky shook with their power. By now, the pilots had learned the truth. While the German Bf-109 and Fw-190 danced like boxers, the P-47 hit like a heavyweight. It was the difference between elegance and overwhelming force. Once airborne, the formation split into hunting pairs, roving thunder. Their orders were simple: attack German supply convoys, rail yards, and airfields. Cut the arteries feeding the Reich's war machine. Over the next weeks, reports began flooding in. Luftwaffe pilots were refusing combat at low altitude. German convoys were being abandoned on open roads. Some enemy soldiers called it der Donnerbalken, the Thunderbolt. And everywhere it went, that sound followed: the deep, rolling growl of its engine, and the unrelenting chatter of 8 machine guns spitting thunder and lead. The same pilots who once laughed now prayed they wouldn't hear it coming. The turning tide. June 10, 1944, just days after D-Day, Normandy, France. The early morning fog still clung to the hedgerows when Captain Hank Mayer's squadron roared in from the Channel. Below them, the fields of Normandy were chaos: German convoys scrambling, tanks grinding through muddy lanes, Allied paratroopers dug into makeshift positions under fire. It was time for the Thunderbolts to go to work. Hank rolled his P-47 into a shallow dive, scanning the road below. Through the smoke, he spotted a German column, half-tracks, fuel trucks, and a pair of Panzer IVs lumbering forward. Perfect targets. "Raven Flight, line up on that road," Hank barked into the radio. "Let's show 'em why they call us Thunderbolts." The formation split. 4 jugs came screaming down from 10,000 feet, the air tearing around their fuselages. Hank's thumb pressed the trigger, and the sky erupted in a wall of sound. 8.50 calibers hammered in unison, tracer fire slicing the mist like fiery rain. Bullets chewed through the lead truck, which exploded in a fireball. Another pass, another explosion. The tanks tried to angle their turrets upward, but it was useless. The Thunderbolts were too fast, too heavy, too relentless. Below, German soldiers scattered for cover, shouting over the deafening roar of engines and gunfire. One tank shell arced upward, bursting near Hank's right wing, a blinding flash. His aircraft jolted violently, alarms blaring. For a heartbeat, the controls went slack. "You hit, Hank," Tex's voice crackled through the radio. "I'm still here," Hank grunted, yanking the stick. "She's smoking, but she's flying." The Thunderbolt had taken a direct hit, a fist-sized hole in the right wing, hydraulics leaking. But the jug didn't quit. It refused. With a wounded snarl, Hank pulled the nose up and circled back for another strike. "Let's finish the job," he shouted. The remaining Thunderbolts dived again, hammering the road until everything below was burning. Flames consumed the convoy, thick black smoke rising over the countryside. When they finally pulled out, Hank looked back. The road was gone, replaced by fire and wreckage. The Luftwaffe had been nowhere in sight. The Germans, once proud masters of the sky, were now hiding from it. By the time the squadron returned to base, the mission reports told the same story again and again. Thunderbolts destroying supply lines. Thunderbolts breaking tank columns. Thunderbolts crippling retreating forces. The aircraft the Germans once mocked had become the spearhead of Allied air power. Days later, captured German pilots were interrogated. One of them, a former ace, reportedly told his captors, "We feared two things, your bombers, and those monsters with 8 guns, the fat ones that dove like stones." That fat one had changed the air war. It wasn't glamorous, but it was unstoppable. Every time the Thunderbolt took off, the ground shook. Every time it dived, men ducked for cover. And every time it returned home, battered but breathing, it proved that brute strength and iron resilience could win where finesse could not. The skies over Europe no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. They belonged to Thunder and Lead. Section 4. The Legend Forged in Fire. September 1944, somewhere over the German border. The war had shifted. The Allies were pushing east and the Thunderbolts led the charge. What began as high-altitude escort missions had turned into brutal, low-altitude warfare, rail yards, bridges, and armor columns. Wherever the Wehrmacht moved, the Thunderbolt followed, leaving only destruction behind. Captain Hank Mayer's squadron, the 366th Fighter Group, the Thunderbolts of Thunderbolt Field, had become a name whispered with awe across Allied bases and fear among German ranks. Their P-47s bore blackened noses streaked with soot, fuselages marked with kill tallies, and shark-mouth paint jobs that seemed to grin before each strike. On this day, Hank's unit was deep in enemy territory, tasked with cutting off a supply train heading toward Aachen. The clouds hung low and heavy, perfect cover for an ambush. "Raven flight, check weapons hot," Hank ordered. "We find that train, we erase it." Minutes later, a column of black smoke appeared in the distance, a train moving fast, its cars loaded with ammunition and fuel. Hank's heart pounded. This was the kind of strike that could break a front line. Targets in sight, coming in from the west. He rolled the P-47 into a dive. The ground rushed up fast, violent, alive with gunfire. Flak bursts cracked around him like thunderclaps. One exploded so close it rocked the entire plane, but Hank didn't flinch. The Jug could take it. He leveled out just 200 feet above the ground. The crosshairs locked on the train engine, a black locomotive puffing steam. Then, with a squeeze of the trigger, the Thunderbolt's guns unleashed hell. Hundreds of rounds slammed into the engine. The boiler exploded in a blinding white flash, tearing the locomotive apart. Flames engulfed the rail cars, secondary explosions ripping through the line as ammunition cooked off. "Good hit, that's a kill," Tex shouted over the radio. "Keep hitting, M," Hank replied. "Let's make sure nothing walks away from that." The rest of the squadron followed, strafing the wreckage until it was nothing but molten debris. When they climbed back into the clouds, the fire below burned so hot it painted the underside of the sky orange. That night back at base, the mess hall buzzed with talk. Stories of the day's missions, the impossible dives, the near-death escapes. But one thing kept coming up: how much punishment the P-47 could take. Hank's own Jug had returned with holes big enough to see daylight through. Another pilot had landed with one landing gear gone in half, a wing missing, yet every one of them was alive. The P-47 was earning its nickname, the Jug that wouldn't die. Even the enemy admitted it. German reports described it as ein fliegender Panzer, a flying tank. Pilots who once sneered now dreaded seeing its silhouette above the horizon. In the end, the Thunderbolt's reputation spread beyond its kills. It wasn't just a plane, it was a statement that American engineering, brute force, and sheer will could turn ridicule into dominance. And as the war neared its final year, the skies over Europe no longer echoed with laughter. They echoed with the deep, unrelenting growl of the R-2800 and the thunder that followed it. From milk jug to nightmare, the P-47 Thunderbolt had forged its legend not in beauty, but in fire and steel.